Hey guys, it's episode 31 of Biomassed. Welcome to the show tonight. We are on at a little bit of an odd time, so may not catch a whole lot of you on the live stream. We're going to be we're doing this on Saturday night, not Sunday. Kind of our normal usual thing every week. We try to shake it up and keep everybody guessing, frankly, to include each other. So tonight it'll be a little bit of a compact show. We've got couple of our usuals on. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started and kick off with some intros. Iron Wolf.
Hello, this is Iron Wolf Saber. I'm the CP1 secretary, and nice to meet you all.
Word. Okay, Pokey.
I'm Pokey Draven, CEO of OSG Planetary Operations and co-host here on Biomassed.
Zell.
Sarai Zell, member of CPM1, co-host here on Biomassed, and a leader of the Top Men Alliance.
Cool. All right. And I'm Jason Larison. I'm a member of OSG on the Dust side, and I fly for Agony on the Eve side. So there's no lack of topics tonight, guys. So kind of what I'd like to kind of kick around, if that's kind of cool with you guys, is some of the more recent stuff. A little bit of discussion on maybe using some existing assets in the game to generate some racial heavy weapons and some things like that to round out some of the weapon and module lines. Literally some of the things that have been floated here in the feedback threads by CCP Ratati here recently. I would like to just kind of briefly get your guys' impression of how we think the Apex suits are doing, and a little bit more about how the burgeoning BPO/ORM push is going for CCP. And maybe we can kick around some ideas about the infamous bandwidth topic, which I know I missed last week, but that's one of the ones that is of critical interest to a lot of folks that actually run some support play. So with that, briefly, what we had is a thread from CCP Ratati where he talked a little bit about using existing assets in games. So, for example, the HMG, and using that model, maybe putting some different colors on it and changing some weapon effects, things like that, to create a new racial heavy weapon. And that's just an example. He didn't specifically lay that one out, but just to kind of tee it up. For one, I think it's a great idea. I think it's awesome because you can actually work the mechanics of things and you can work balancing, and it gives you a lot of different player options. I would totally be okay with like an Amara heavy laser or some kind of Galente heavy blaster, something along those lines. So I think it's a fantastic idea, and it's one that I'm glad that they're exploring. Just kind of open it up to you guys.
Well, I think the AV market right now is heavily dominated by anti-armor weapons. I mean, pretty much all of them are anti-armor, save the plasma cannon, obviously. So I think something that's laser focused would be great, particularly one that can be used against aerial targets.
Very atly.
Laser focused.
Very atly.
It had to be brought up.
You see what I did there, but something that can be used against aerial vehicles pretty easily. Like I think using the laser rifle would be pretty legit because, like I said, it's heavily anti-armor dominated in terms of available AV weapons, and I think we definitely need to push to have a more balanced approach to it because right now it's a little ridiculous on how hard it is to do an armor tanked vehicle opposed to a shield tank vehicle simply because of the damage profiles. So I'd be definitely open to exploring options for different damage profile AV weapons. Light and heavy, by the way. I think we definitely need more light AV weapons as well as the heavy ones, just because it's a bit lacking, and I find it difficult for some roles. I think would benefit from having more options available in terms of weapons, particularly the MR, which kind of gets screwed in terms of only really having 2 light weapons and no heavy weapons and a single light weapons, or a sidearm, I'm sorry. So okay. I think opening that up is going to be really good for a lot of those races.
That's pretty legit. What do you think, Iron Wolf?
There's definitely plenty of room in terms of what we can play with stat-wise, but it's just more of a question, can we make this function or look right in the game? Because it's going to look really odd when you have an HMG shooting up mass driver shells.
No, I off the top of my head, what I thought was you could probably take a Forge gun model and put a lot of gold on it, and then just have a big yellow beam come out of it, not unlike the laser rifle now.
Yeah, I mean, the Forge gun's got a kind of generic model. I think it'd be hard to use the HMG model for other weapons.
I think you would have to use, for the HMG, that's really the one that you could go with the Galente. I would just give it a real shiny green and silver paint job, no rust, and changes the color of the shit coming out of the barrel. And I think really what you're talking about is changing the damage profile on it. Is what you're really doing is there's some cosmetic stuff, but it's really changing the damage profile of the HMG. Now that's just like I said, that's the really quick and dirty way to do it. Is kind of how I was approaching. What's the easiest way to get to an initial foray into racial heavy weapons for all four races?
You can even approach it from a more Eve standpoint that it's actually an ammo type swap opposed to an entirely different weapon, where you're loading in a different type of ammunition that ultimately changes the damage profile, and that way you're not really getting weird with colors and animations and whatnot. It just it does this instead, and I mean the muzzle flash can be a different color if you want to go that way, but it's a little more of a in terms of lore, a little more believable rather than, like Iron Wolf said, shooting mass driver shells, and it would look really strange, I think.
Jill, any thoughts?
I'm iffy on it. I kind of want to see like actual models of things, but if it's gonna contribute enough to the gameplay, it's worth it.
Well, I would let me throw this at you. If you went with using existing models, and then you got all the spreadsheet numbers dialed in, all the mechanics of like how you want it to function, like if it's got a different firing style or whatever, if you get all that in, then down the road, like if lightning strikes and leprechauns like start farting rainbows and whatever, and they generate like a more serious actual patch for dust, where they actually add assets, it would be a pretty easy thing at that point to swap the new asset and some new animations in and use all the existing, the quote unquote balanced weapon already. That way you're not kind of going through the trauma of doing all that at one time, trying to figure out the balance of the weapon. You're literally just working the cosmetics of it at that point.
Yeah.
I mean, I would offer that people are still beefing about the 4 rifles, and they've been in the game forever.
I guess it kind of comes down to what's CCP's commitment, if their willingness to actually add additional assets later down the line if they go that route. Because I mean, like you said, I totally agree that it'd be good to get the balance out of the way, even if the cosmetics are a little hacky. I mean, I don't particularly like it, but it's also a nice way to actually get it working properly. It's just I wouldn't want it to stay that way. I'd like it to actually, get fixed and look proper and actually feel like the weapon is supposed to be eventually, in a semi, reasonable amount of time.
Yeah, and True Adamance wants an MR tank.
Yeah. He won't know what to do with himself once he gets it.
He won't let us recolor the Galinti one, though.
Oh, well, let me put it this way. I think if you gave him something or nothing, something he would take.
Yeah, well, I actually talked to him a bit about this, and his logic is if I'm stubborn and say no long enough, they'll just eventually add it in. And I basically said I'd rather actually do something rather than be stubborn. So I'm working on him.
I am unconvinced that his stubbornness, as much as I like True, by the way, is the thing that would push CCP over the edge to add a big fucking gold-plated lozenge with wheels into the game.
I tease him a lot, but I think it's great that we have at least a few diehard faction loyalists.
Yes and no. When it gets in the way of actually progress, it's a little frustrating.
I'm going to have to agree with Jason on the fact that if we do all these stats things ahead of time, it becomes so much easier to justify, hey, our team, can you make us a new gun?
Yep.
And we already hammered out all the functions, all the things about it, and all we have to do now is just match the art and the animations and the sounds to go with it.
One of the things that and I've said this before, I think I've said it before, but one of the things I really, really wish that they had done was the same weapons that you mount on the labs and on the side of the drop ships would be the same things that the heavy suits carried. So now you're making one model that would effectively works across all of them.
That would be a big change, though, because you would be, what would you be doing? You'd be tossing out, I don't know, you'd have to figure out how to put the HMG on a turret.
Yeah, but it's pretty simple. All you do is
you would have more guns then, because you'd have your HMG and your Forge and your, the Forge is a railgun.
Yeah, exactly. All it is is exactly a small rail, but it has a different a different animation and an image, but it could literally be the same thing. The blaster would probably need to get, obviously that's the one that's most clunky, and then you got a missile launcher, which I would not have like that. I would not put that on a heavy suit. But the HMG would be easy. I mean, I could totally see bombing around in a lav with like an HMG on top. That's totally legit.
Well, and it kind of makes sense that the
That'd
heavy
be
suit is
OP.
basically carrying an in-place turret, but actually carrying it around. That's why it needs special equipment to actually carry the damn thing.
Yeah, and
Mhm.
I've definitely seen discussion on wanting that.
Yeah, like I said, I think it would have made things fairly simple. From in theory, in terms of how you balance certain things, certainly would have cut down, made it been more efficient for art assets and things of that nature. So, like I said, that's one of those kind of I wish that they had fixed it or had thought through that before they kind of emplaced it. I would also suspect when all that was getting put together that it was sort of a rush for more stuff in the game, period, and kind of really gave a damn what it was or what it looked like. They just wanted more stuff at one point.
Well, I mean, they still do that when they advertise. We have all these maps and all these weapons, and really it's only a handful of weapons and a gazillion variations that don't really change much. So they definitely inflate their armory a bit more than it actually is.
Did they finally take the was it 32 versus 32 off of the website?
I doubt it. I can
A
check
lot
right
of
now.
places, yes.
God, I hope so. That's embarrassing. All right. Well, that's kind of cool. I'm just kind of curious, what other things can we use for if we're going to go with the line of not just for heavy weapons, but if you're using existing assets in the game, what other areas are there that we could probably take advantage of that process for?
I say
Well, I mean,
repair turns.
Oh, that's legit.
yeah,
I
vehicle
don't
logistics.
know.
is
I
a big deal.
remember when we had remote repairers on all the vehicles, and those were so goddamn fucking clunky. It wasn't even funny trying to lock onto somebody, then trying to repair them. Then they just bump out of range, and now you have to start the whole process over again, and accidentally might shoot them up.
You had to aim it from like the driver view, didn't you?
That also, and it was just so goddamn annoying. If it was on a small turn, it'd be so much easier. It actually increased team play synergy, and it just probably balanced it even further.
Yeah, no, I could see that. I mean, to me, the one that stands out is just taking the rep tool and turn the beam like blue or some shit to and then rep shields. I know that sounds very easy to say, and it may be like one of the most incredibly difficult things to do in the game. Who knows?
Well, the ability to rep shields on vehicles existed in the past, so it's conceivable that you could apply the same function to a repair tool for infantry as well. If that's what you're getting at.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it would be like I said, it'd be pretty cool. You have like the little gold beam for armor, the little blue beam for like shields, and I'm actually a fan of you could have like a hybrid one that would have a low to moderate rep rate, but it would touch on both shields and armor simultaneously.
Yeah, I'd like to see that for infantry and vehicles. I mean, in general, the support class can be in some ways a little bit boring or non-existent in the case of vehicles, and I think that adding more options and actually making the design fit around that would make it a lot more interesting because it's kind of boring. I mean, vehicles in general are pretty boring. Logistics don't exist for vehicles anymore. I think giving more options for logistics infantry would be excellent as well.
Yep. I mean, I actually, one of the things I was looking at was the different things you could do with deployables, like perhaps different effects or stuff like that for the same deployable skin. Now, I know that's probably that's probably actually maybe harder to work in than like weapon effects and things like that, but that might be pretty interesting. Like you could almost have like a counter uplink, basically a cyno inhibitor is what you're really talking about is throw it on the ground and then it's got an AoE around it that prevents uplinks from working. Doesn't kill them, but it just prevents them from working as long as it's operational. I think that would be pretty cool.
Yeah, I'd like EWAR to actually expand to be more than just scanning and not being scanned. I think that
somebody on the forum made a really interesting point about that is that is not actually EWAR. We call it EWAR and Dust, but that's not actually in New Eden how EWAR works. There's multiple different things that fall under EWAR, all the way from jamming to trapping disruption, damps, and all kind of jazz like that, and to include buffs. By the way, a lot of people forget that it's not just effects that you apply on an enemy, but you can apply E-War to your guys in your fleet, and you give them buffs for tracking or like lock range and stuff like that. So you could have a very deep level of gameplay that gets overlaid into the current dust if they actually approached it from an E-War mechanic, which is really what we just call scanning right now.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of stuff that you can do in E, which makes fights very interesting around E1. There's, like you said, there's jamming. There's even just like what are they called? Neutralizers for capacitor and whatnot. If vehicles had capacitor, you could have a whole subset of tools to do with that. And I think that the overly simplistic approach they took has really kind of cut out a lot of the complexity and depth of the gameplay that Eve enjoys. And I wish they would actually. I mean, a lot of those take a complete design overhaul. I mean, capacitors for vehicles is a pretty hefty undertaking, but I think you get my point that there's things you can do that actually do modify the gameplay in a significant way. That's not just shoot the guy and tank through everything.
Yeah, no, I think you're definitely onto something with that. But
didn't Rattati at one point mention, maybe I'm totally insane here, but mention like a spy uplink where you could drop it and it would do like a radial scan in the area with a certain precision, and you could drop those in areas to watch for incoming infantry or something, and then they would show up on the TACnet?
Yes, he did.
I think that'd be totally legit.
Yeah, like stuff like that is pretty sweet. I mean, and you can flip it around, like Jason said. You can drop it, and it, it's a countermeasure against uplinks, or it creates a jamming field where scans don't work inside there for either one or both parties. I mean, it's stuff like that. It's really no art asset change. It's just a nano hive or an uplink or whatever. But it's in terms of technical terms, if that's possible, that's really cool stuff to explore, and I'd like to actually see more of that now that we're kind of getting into the phase where we can look at more advanced techniques to modify the gameplay like that.
Yeah, one thing I was actually thinking is, if like that devil spawn grease fire shit of bandwidth comes to fruition, which I'm kind of resigning myself to the fact that it will, is that what you may want to do is look at some different variants of some of the the deployables. Like for one, if you had a hardened uplink, I think it's what I was kicking around in the forums, is basically something that like a single flux grenade can't take out, and it's something that has longer combat shelf life, so to speak. I think that would be maybe one way is a good trade-off, in terms of the that thing that should be not named if it comes into the game.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty valid point. I mean, it might be advantageous to you to carry a piece of equipment that's going to survive a flux, or if you put it down, they're going to have to spend more time sitting there and shooting it to get rid of it. That can be used to a tactical advantage, because if they want to get rid of it, they're going to do it, and you can use that to your advantage. So that definitely brings tactics to the game, which is always a good thing in my book.
Yep. So real quick before we hop onto the subject of evilness, does anybody else have any ideas on like utilizing some existing assets in game and shaping them a little bit to try to do some fundamentally different things or bring racial parity? Any other last kind of saved rounds on that one?
I want a active scanner called a target designator, and it only goes to where your cross point is, but it'll attack a person for an extra long time. But you can only hit that one person.
Oh, I like that. I like that a lot. That'd be pretty good. That'd be a great way to find snipers in the hills.
And it'll have a zoom function.
Yeah, like an ADS. Yeah, I mean that would be really nice. That's a good one. Let's see, Pokezel. Anything else?
One thing I've been knocking around for a while is something along the lines of a target painter. If you had some sort of countermeasures for swarms that a vehicle could equip, you could have someone with a target painter, which would reduce the lock time of a swarm launcher. It's like a repair tool sort of thing you could lock on from long range, and it would paint the target, and then people could lock on faster with swarm, something like that. I mean, that's all a matter of balance, but just ideas where you can, again, countermeasures to other countermeasures. It adds depth and complexity to the game, and I'd love to see stuff like that.
Yeah, that was actually something I was thinking through. Is um, I like having more options, but the trick is having hard counters to the options. Um, like everybody beefs about equipment spam. You know, I got it. It can be a problem. I totally acknowledge that. I'm also a huge fan of this thing called, and I'm just going to throw this out there, but it's called a fucking Allotech Flux Grenade. That cures equipment spam quickly. But like I see their point, but I'm a big fan of, like I said, having the hard counters. Now the interesting paradigm you put yourself in is if you have hard counters, like let's say you have uplinks and then you have like an uplink inhibitor, it's still just more equipment that gets put on the ground, which I kind of made the comment to True Adamants in a forum post that nothing in Dust scales well. Two scouts on one team adds tactical flavor and tactical challenge. 12 on the same team, that's a problem. And that's kind of the same for vehicles, heavy suits, and apparently now equipment. So if you started introducing counters to equipment, what you're really doing is you're just still introducing more deployable equipment to the game.
Yeah, I think the overspam of specific roles, it comes from a fact that I think the roles are a little too good at doing everything. I mean, sure that certain roles has an optimization, but ideally you'd want to have a role where what it does is unique and it's necessary. So you need to have all of them rather than just, fill the room full of heavies and nothing can get in, so that's all you have to do. So I think that's an underlying problem, but it's a difficult one to fix without really starting to mess with stuff, which is kind of scary.
Yeah, no, I could totally. I mean, well, to a degree, one of the things that struck me when we were having the big kerfuffle about rail rifles a
But
few
yeah,
weeks ago was.
did you?
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's not important. Go ahead.
Well, I'm thinking in terms of like how, like it'd be kind of interesting to hear Iron Wolf and Soraya talk about how Rattati views balance, because one of the key things that helped snap a lot of things into focus for me was a critical balancing factor for him appears to be like usage rates. And he even conceded the point that something can be overused but not necessarily overpowered. But he views balance also in the terms of balanced usage across different variants, races, and types, and things of that nature. And that just strikes me as one. It's a laudable goal. I'll buy that, but exceedingly difficult to do in a game like Dust with. And we already have a lot of options. I mean, you have a ton of different tactical options for people now. So that just strikes me as almost like an unreachable goal to try to use that as a balancing factor. So it kind of makes me wonder, like, how many roles should a 16-person team have for it to be balanced? Because if you have a bunch of people running individuals, they're going to run probably heavier scouts. People on a team, you will coordinate with each other to like who's going to run Logi, who's going to run heavy, who's going to run this. So it's one of those things where I'm kind of curious as how do you balance for role usage on a 16-person team? Because I mean, it's a very finite number that you're dealing with.
I have to. Well, you do have a point. There comes what I like to call role saturation, where you just have way so many roles that there's no way that they can all be fielded evenly and properly, and that there's always going to be the popular ones. For example, Caldari is one of the more popular ships still in New Eden, regardless of all the balance changes and how terrible they are for PvP.
Yep.
But despite this, the usage factors usually is a flag indicator. It's a reason to go look at it as to why is it so popular. And if it turns out that it's because everything else sucks, then that means everything else needs a buff. But if it turns out that one thing is definitely overpowered, there's too many good things going for it, then that may be a call to try to adjust it.
That's a solid point, and I think that's one of the things that has not all, but like some of the kind of the pro logis like me kind of upset about the bandwidth idea. Honestly, is that like I totally buy what you're saying, that if something is too good, it's being overused. But I think I would challenge anybody that says that logistics. Logistics is in a really good place right now in terms of their suit design and how they work. And a lot of the logistics suits, or at least half of them, Amar and Caldari, are specifically tailored around deployables. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, it's just that Like I said, there's always that there's always the ideal balance, and there's the unideal balance. The unideal balance happens all the time because, for example, no one likes using single shot weapons in a game full of automatic weapons.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Just overall, the not only usage factor is a certain type of flag that we often that CCP Vertati loves to use. The other factor he likes to use is how the kill factor is, how well is it performing on the field versus everything else. For example, if a certain platform was getting 50 KDR when the entire game average is around 5, then there's something definitely wrong.
Oh yeah, no, I'm totally with you on that. Like, like I said, I'm a big fan of trying to develop like the hard counter to things, and I think that really is what leads you to tactical gameplay. But no, like I said, I totally see what you're saying. It just kind of makes me wonder when you're running 16-person teams and you try to figure out like, well, hey, there's too many of this suit or there's too many of this widget or gadget. It's just the raw team number really starts to limit you because I've been in several matches here in this week. I was kind of counting it up, where you would have like 3 squads of like 2 or 3 people, then everybody else on the team is solo. Well, to me, that's usually where you get a lot of spam of equipment, spam of heavies, and spam of scouts because people are trying to take care of themselves. Does that kind of make sense?
I mean, yes, it does. And like I said, there are people who are going to stick to certain things because they like the way it looks or how it plays out. It tailors to them and them specifically, and it could be easily just because it's the popular option. We have to be considerate of that as well.
Yeah, no, I got you on that, man. Let's see. Well, since we're already kind of talking a
I
little
mean,
bit
it
about
does
that,
reach a
no,
point
go
though
ahead.
where you're in a match, you're actually playing, you go, there are way too many heavies in here for this to be just the popular option. I mean, I myself, I like to run commando, and recently I've been switching to sentinel just so I can deal with all the other heavies because it's so crazy and how excessive it's getting. So I think that things can be popular, but at the same time, if they're too popular, then that's also an issue.
I like to call it the "you come in this or you go home" factor. If it gets to that point, then there's something definitely wrong.
Yeah, but I'm with you on that. But there's also a certain amount of kind of the stock market syndrome in this, where it, flavor of the month. There may be a clear mathematical advantage to certain things, or certain maps lead you that way. But the reality is, if it gets in the player base's mind that it's Sentinel or go home, Scout or go home, or whatever, that's what they're all going to do. That doesn't always necessarily mean that it's actually the better option for the match, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I do think that that's possibly some of the case. I don't really I don't always share everyone's agreement that we're in this state of this horrible imbalance right now. I think we were actually pretty darn close, and I'm not sure where everything suddenly became, oh my gosh, it's unbalanced again.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you on that, Zell. I mean, shocker, but
Well, I think the suits themselves are getting pretty close to performing in general the way they should. It's just a matter of getting them to perform against each other in a way which promotes a more diverse role and suit choice amongst the players rather than a very drastic shift towards one a particular role or suit.
I do want to say though that right now, even if we say that the heavies and scouts are the favored suits right now, that is far better than we've ever been in before. Given that it used to be, it was either you had to run an assault suit or you had to run a Logi suit. Whereas right now we have 2 suits that people are both using heavily, which is a fairly decent. It's actually a fairly decent variety when you think about it.
Well, you're saying that instead of having to run one, you can pick between 2 of the 5.
Yes, that's twice as good.
I love the logic.
And really, we know that commando suits are just wannabe assaults, anyways.
Well, they really are, but that's an entirely different discussion.
Or are assaults wannabe commandos?
They should have never been born in the first place. Assaults should have had 2 light weapons, and that's the end of the story.
Yep.
Are we going
I
to
would
start a
agree with that.
petition to remove commando suits then?
No, I think that's too much. I honestly, I won't get too into it, but I think that people are trying too hard to make the commandos and the assaults be different, and they're really just kind of two sides of the same coin. I think they should probably be a little more similar in what they do and just accept it for what it is, that they are basically the same role, and they just,
Well,
you know.
I think you could. I think you actually could differentiate them very, very quickly. If you take the commando and you basically adjusted their weapon support bonuses, don't give them a raw damage buff to like rifles. Basically, you give them something that encourages them to stay on the trigger longer. Basically, like an actual like a support weapon, like an offensive support class, and then you give it a buff to AV. Like if you did that, like call it good, and then leave it alone. That's probably a pretty legit thing that you could do to separate the commando and give it a legitimate, pretty decent role.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this in the past, that the commando reload bonus in itself is basically a buff to AV weapons. Because reload bonus is nice for anti-infantry weapons, but it's not really a critical thing. But for anti-vehicle, where the AV weapons typically have small magazines, having a reload speed is basically a straight buff to your DPS. I mean, plasma cannon being a prime example. That, I mean, with a 3.5 second reload, you only get one shot. You want that reload as quickly as possible. So, I mean, in that regard, it's definitely an anti-vehicle fit. So, I mean, I would love to see commandos actually get the skill set they would need to be kind of a more AV centric suit. But the problem is that we don't have enough light AV weapons to actually make that happen, which is going back to our first discussion.
Oh yeah. No, I totally. I'm kind of with you. And off the top of my head, there's, like I said, if you really viewed the commando as an offensive support platform versus the Logi, which is more of a an equipment or a defensive support mechanism, you kind of differentiate them in your mind that way. If you add some additional heavy weapons, that's an easy way to generate some I think some pretty good movement that way in terms of how you do some different AV things, but that's really for the Sentinels. What I think you could do though is add some variants to the existing AV weapons, some like legitimate variants out there that really mess with perhaps the damage profiles. Like I would actually like to have like swarm launchers that do different types of damage profiles. We'll pull a page out of Eve. One of the hallmarks of Caldari stuff is missiles. Swarm's a missile, basically. And the other hallmark of that is you can swap your damage type. Like, that's really what gives you the flexibility in a tactical engagement, as I can pick the damage type that will do the most damage to whatever I think I'm going to face. So you can maybe pick something that's more shield, that's more oriented to doing damage to shield tank vehicles versus, just pure armor tank or armor damage options.
Yeah, I mean, that goes back to a long issue where the Caldari Commando, it gets a buff for damage for hybrid rail weapons. Well, the Swarm Launcher is not a hybrid rail weapon. It's an explosive weapon. So actually the Minmatar gets the bonus for the Caldari Swarm Launcher, which is kind of messed up. And this primarily comes because the bonuses are, or rather the weapons are tagged by damage type, not necessarily by what race they are. So because the Minmatar gets the explosive damage, it gets the the Swarm Launcher. So if you gave different ammo types for the Swarm or for any AV weapon for that matter, you could actually then have it properly apply to the commando that it's associated with, or at least what it would be associated with.
Yeah, no, I mean, it sounds totally legit to me, but like I said, who knows, it may actually be like exceedingly difficult to actually implement.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, if you had more light AV weapons, I think you could totally drum up a proper set of bonuses for the commando to make it a good AV fit. I mean, one of the hallmarks of it is that because you have the two light weapons, you can carry an AV weapon without sacrificing your offensive anti-infantry capabilities. You can still carry your assault rifle, your combat rifle, along with your swarm launcher if you want. So having that capability, those two light weapons, is really instrumental if you want to be light AV but not be totally helpless and stuck with a sidearm. So I think that in that regard, the Commando is extremely well suited for that. It's just the lack of racial weapons that's standing in the way right now.
Yep. No, I think you're on it, man. Let's see. All right. So, what else you guys want to talk about tonight? What is on your mind? I have a couple different ones,
Did you
but
actually explain why you hate the beloved bandwidth idea?
oh yeah. Well, it's pretty simple. Like I kind of mentioned it earlier. Taken in isolation, when you only look at the bandwidth option, what it really does is, I mean, it's in effect a fairly direct nerf to logistics play for a reason.
It's a buff to
There.
logistics play.
Okay. Well, you can either let me finish or you can continue to spout bullshit. I'm okay with either option, but just let me know before I keep going on.
Go on.
Okay. So, and here's the reason I say that. If you ask anybody that plays Logi a lot, ask them how many times they have to switch their suits, even to different Logi suits, to put down different pieces of equipment. Because after the first 5 minutes of a match, generally there's not a lot of equipment around because the people that were one suit wonders, they're busy trying to get their sleigh on. So that's the first thing. And having some options, like if you're running an Amar or a Cal Logi, you've only got 3 equipment slots. You're going to be wanting to put down different types of equipment. Like you'll have a Hive suit, you'll have an uplink suit, and then you'll have one that's kind of mixed, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff that goes on that actually, deepens the Logi play. But once you get beyond that, I will, I don't think anybody will argue that equipment spam to the point where it may limit or degrade the actual gameplay can be a problem. Now, I will also tell you, anecdotally, this is just for me, and I realize I may be out of the norm. I don't get nearly like the game-breaking lag that it seems like some people get. I think some people do get much worse lag. I don't know, maybe I've got a really good connection or something, but I will get it occasionally, but not often, to be very honest. So I may have a skewed perspective on this.
I don't think it's just performance lag. I think also having 5,000 uplinks on the field is not good design. I think it's terrible design, and I think that you should have there. If your game strategy is dump them everywhere, then your game strategy sucks, and the fact that the game allows you to do it sucks. And I would rather see on any given battlefield, 4 or 5 really well placed uplinks than 60 uplinks.
I think you're missing where people put or why a lot of those uplinks go down. Remember what I said about most people that play probably aren't in a 6-man squad. They're putting their own uplinks in, is what's happening, because they're not in a squad where they're coordinating who's got the uplinks in this 6-man squad. And
right,
I'm very confident that that's where a lot of this, where a lot of what we say is equipment spam, it has nothing to do with strategy. It literally has to do with people, frankly, kind of like you, that play mostly solo, that are looking to take care of themselves. Very understandably, I might add.
But it's not just about solo players. It's also, look at PC. You have the exact same thing. There's 50, 60 uplinks down. Why? Because everyone says drop uplinks everywhere. We need uplinks everywhere. And in fact, since the game started, since Uprising 1.0, at least when they put in PC, the outcome of a PC match could be determined within the first 2 minutes by looking at how many uplinks were on the field on each side. If you could see that, you could tell which team was going to win, because it's whoever has the most uplinks wins.
I would tell you that I think you're misinterpreting something, but sure. One thing I would offer,
that's how Cronus won the FanFest tournament. We threw down a shit ton of links everywhere, and no matter who came up against us, they couldn't counter us.
And the other thing to put down is you had mentioned that you have different suits of different deployables that you use. Nothing about this proposal stops that, because no, it doesn't, because you have the same bandwidth on every Logi suit.
No, but if I'm running a Cal Logi, which is a 3 equipment slot suit, let's say I've got an uplink heavy suit, I put that down in the initial stages of the match to assist in gaining a foothold and making sure that we can maintain tactical momentum. Then you switch to a Hive suit where you can use to hardpoint different points on the map and help your team from a defensive standpoint or a resupply standpoint. If I switch that Logi suit, and like my equipment starts to pop at that point when I start putting new equipment down.
When you put new equipment down, because you can only have a certain amount of equipment on the ground personally at a time.
Yeah, I don't really think you have any idea how that works for real. I mean, I don't mean that evil. I'm literally. I don't think you understand how that works in team play for a Logi to have to cover that much ground. Like, I don't think you understand how many pieces of equipment you actually do need on the ground.
There needs to be less equipment on the ground.
Then I would rather that you limit the amount of deployables that you can put on the ground. So if you don't want a proto uplink that I can put 3 uplinks on the ground, then make it I can only put 1 of any kind of uplink, and that's what I carry. Don't limit me by bandwidth.
That's
the
the same thing
much
as
bigger
bandwidth,
nerf.
except
It's a much
it's
bigger
now
nerf.
for every individual piece of gear. It's the same thing.
No, it's not, because I can lay down the uplinks and I can lay down the hives.
Which
I
you
may
still
not
can
be
do.
able to. No, you can't. You
Why do you
cannot
want to
do that.
multiply bandwidth? It's probably going to
If
lag
you-
up the game more.
If you know how many, okay, so think about it this way. So you want to deploy, if you know you can put X number on the field, then you don't put more than half of that of any given type if you're trying to split between what type of equipment you're deploying. But all of your equipment is preserved between Logi suits as long as you don't go over your quota.
Okay, sure.
You could do
I mean-
more. You can do more uplinks or more nano hives or half and half of each or whatever. You have that flexibility. Why would you want a capped limit that says, "Oh, well, you can only have 2 uplinks and 2"? You know, I'm gonna.
No,
just,
you're not. You're totally.
What
Both
is-
of you, stop.
Can you answer
Stop.
me a question really quick?
Zell,
Just-
stop talking. Both of you are absolutely not understanding what I'm saying. Like, if you pick a piece of equipment, like, okay, was it the like the gauged hives, the Ishcone gauged hives, where you can deploy 4 of those? Just like lower the amount of those individual pieces of equipment you can deploy. That's not individual bandwidth. That's not doing anything with bandwidth. That's literally just lowering that part of the equipment, but you retain the tactical flexibility to put additional pieces of equipment on the ground or additional types of equipment on the ground.
You still do. You're asking. I mean, you don't want to take away. You're asking for a larger nerf. You're asking for less flexibility and a larger nerf.
No.
I'd rather increase the carry-on size and lower the amount of clusters each hive has.
Yeah, which I thought was a very legitimate idea. Now, the only part I don't know about that is you could lead to more pieces of deployed equipment on the ground. They just last a lot shorter period. I think there's actually some real merit to that
And when you
idea.
combine it with the bandwidth, it all evens out. So if you're
fuck all that.
constantly at the front lines now with deploying stuff to support your attack line.
Yeah. Okay.
Overall, it's going to lower the amount of stuff on the field. It's going to increase the amount of tacticality, your flexibility, and it's the idea is just to give everyone options and to just being a Logi and not just let's pretend to be a Logi then swap to a Slayer suit. That's what it's going to be on.
So
Resolving mostly.
let me ask you
People
a
can
question.
stay Logi purely and still have a great amount of flexibility.
If you stay as a Logi, right?
Right. Like you could even have a suit. You know, if you have a
That's
fit
not
for
flexibility,
deployable,
dude.
you throw out all your modules and stuff. You could even switch to a Logi suit with all active equipment like scanners and repair tools and stuff, and all your equipment stays down because that type of suit has the bandwidth to support it.
The bottom line is you are actually removing flexibility from people that run Logi suits. And I also noted up front that if you want to reduce equipment spam, then no matter how you do it, there's a hard nerf to the Logis. Okay. I would also point out that everybody is saying that you shouldn't keep your role bonus if you're not playing that role. Okay, sure, I'll buy that, but the way that we're going about doing this affects Logi players dramatically more than other roles. That's just how that works. I'm not saying that. I'm not disagreeing that that's how it's working. All I'm saying is that I actually don't think you really know what the fuck you're talking about when it comes to how you play Logi over the course of an entire match with the amount of people that actually do play Logi for real, not the one suit wonders. That's all I'm saying is it doesn't strike me that you understand really what you're saying. And if you say it's a buff to Logis, that's bullshit. Because unless you can show me what are the other things that we're doing to
It is a buff
upgrade
to
or optimize
it is a buff
the
to
suit.
Logi players because you're now the suits that can deploy that level of equipment, whereas other suits cannot have that level of equipment out. Those players cannot support that level of equipment while running, say, a heavy suit.
Kills roll stomping.
Sure, but
it's not really a
then
buff, though.
that does not stop somebody from switching from their cloak scout to a sentinel with an HMG, then back to a cloak scout. Like, the cost on switching roles for them is dramatically lower than the cost on switching roles for a Logi suit.
I disagree, because you're talking being able to keep Logi level equipment at the number of equipment you can deploy as a logistics after you switch suits is like saying, well, if you switch from a scout to a heavy, you can keep your speed bonus.
Not in any way,
Deployables
shape,
is a
or form.
huge part of the value of a Logi suit, and to say that you should be able to keep that when you leave a Logi suit is ridiculous.
Yeah, well, like I said, you guys have already made your mind up. That was also very clear from Rattati's OP. So nothing that anybody says is going to change your mind. So have at it.
I think it's a shame, because I think the whole equipment spam really wasn't intentional from the start. I mean, when you had equipment that one of the attributes it had was you can have this many deployed at once, I don't think the intention was ever to actually let you have, stack on different types of the same thing and then deploy, all of each set.
When you can spell GGFA on the map with uplinks.
Well, right, but I think what I'm getting at is that the fact that, okay, so your proto uplink, you can put down 3 of them, and this one you can put down 2 of, so now you can put down 5. I think that really wasn't intentional from the get-go. So ideally what it would be is that you have, here's your proto uplink, you could have 3 out. Okay, that's your cap now. You can only have 3 uplinks at a given time because those are the uplinks you have. But unfortunately, I've been told that would require a massive rework of the system, which is a real shame, because I think that's really how it should work, rather than stacking different types.
But I mean,
kind of circumventing that feature of having, a max deployable for each type.
Rather than saying you can have 3 uplinks and 3 nanohives, why is that better than having a system that says you can have 6 deployables and you get to choose whether that's 6 uplinks, 6 nanohives, or any combination thereof? Bandwidth is a more flexible system.
You can always bring in equipment variants that also eat up less bandwidth but don't perform as well too, so that's even more further options we can add in.
Yeah, but that sort of thing you want to hold off on, because I mean
you have to see how the existing changes will play before you can add variants to take advantage of the new game mechanic.
Yeah, I think it is a rather drastic change, and obviously frustrating for a lot of players, and it's obviously by no means perfect anyway, which is kind of what I was getting at, is that it's not the ideal fix, which is unfortunate, but from, like I said, what I've been told, the ideal fix isn't really on the books because it would require so much work to actually pull off, so it just kind of sucks, is what I'm saying.
A lot of things suck in this game because the initial design could not be met early on, so they just did a bandage over it.
Yep, which is, it's
equipment deployability is that one thing, and this bandwidth was the original intention, but we're gonna have to find out how that plays out now and work with it.
Yeah, for sure. No,
I could have sworn bandwidth was a player idea at one point first, but
it was. It's a really age-old idea from like 2 FanFests ago almost.
Okay.
Well,
I mean,
it's
when they
been
were talking
hounded on
about
by
drones
players.
and PvE and shit too.
Yep.
Right. It's
That's
probably
stuff.
about that good of an idea.
Hey, it's how like we're supposed to have a player market by now, right?
So,
And
like all
fighters
the,
and
you mean
and
all the stuff
map.
I mean, I guess there are hard
all
things
the
you can
stuff
do,
that
which
people
the Logis
want
will hate, is that
and
you can
would be
only...
useful you can't do, but all the shit you don't want you can do. That's amazing.
I think a lot of people want bandwidth. I've heard a lot of positive response to it.
Mm.
I guess we'll have to see how it goes. I mean, like Jay said, I think the dev team has pretty much made up their mind this is going to happen. So you kind of throw your hands up in the air and go, well, all right, let's see if it blows up or not,
Well, the next thing you do afterwards is trying to adjust all the knobs to make it actually feel better instead of terrible.
Yeah. I think one key thing is to say that it's not necessarily a buff to Logis. It's because it's not a buff at all. It just makes them more essential, but I wouldn't really call that a buff. And I think that
I'd say it's a nerf that hits everyone else harder. It's a buff compared to everyone else. Everyone is getting a nerf.
I think you're literally looking at that
Logis is getting
backwards.
a nerf less.
Are you serious?
how is it buffing all the other classes? Because all the other classes are now stuck with one hive or one deployable,
Which
and that
is
includes a scout,
no, yeah,
who
but
was
what I'm getting at,
for the
you're
longest time roll stomping on the MR Logi, because scout was far more preferable because he can run there faster and deploy more uplinks.
sure, but what you're telling me is that yeah, okay. Let me put it this way: it it does it is a nerf to people that use a suit once and never touch it for the rest of the match. It is also a serious nerf for those that stay in equipment-driven suits that need to use different types of equipment based on the situation throughout the map. The trade-offs that you make as a Logi over time in a match, not the first 5 minutes, but over time, will be much more starker than the trade-offs that anybody else would have to make when they switch roles. Now, again, you'll also notice that going way back to what I first said is it is very difficult to judge this based on the concept of bandwidth in isolation without understanding anything else that they're going to do. Because if I'm not mistaken, the Logi suit is the only suit that hasn't gotten a significant rework of any kind, like in the current sort of drop suit optimization run that we've done throughout the hotfixes. So we don't really know how all this works in conjunction with each other. At its face value, given the current Logi suits and how Logis play over the course of a match, there is no way that this can be misconstrued as a buff. It does limit the current level of tactical flexibility, which I, for one, regardless of the role that you play, I actually think that that's has always been one of the positives about Dust, is that it allowed you to switch between different roles, different suit types, dramatically different setups based on your personal preferences, your play style, or the tactical options presented to you. That has always been one of the things that I actually thought was a strength in Dust. But now what we're looking to do is to constrain that. And it was also one of the things that truly made it somewhat unique against other first-person shooter games. So that's where my position on this is. Now it'd be really cool if they would come out and say, well, here's what we're going to do to the Logi class, which, as I said, should be about time to get that done. Like if they would do that in conjunction with the bandwidth, there might be some positivity here, and I'm totally on board for that. But trying to take them in isolation, it doesn't work very well because the current Logi suits aren't in a great place, frankly, in some cases.
Well, they tried a uniform once and everyone yelled, so he's a little discouraged from changing stats at the moment.
Just so I'm tracking what you're getting at, Jay, just because I play Logi, but obviously not nearly as much as you do. So what you're basically saying is that you spawn into the match, let's say you switch into your MR Logi suit, and you go and you scatter your uplinks. And let's say you consume most of your bandwidth in the process. Now let's say the situation changes, now you need nanohives, you switch to your Caldari, your Logi, and now you need to drop nanohives, but in the process of doing so, you're basically blowing up your uplinks. And so what you're getting at is that you want a set number of uplinks versus a set number of hives, so you can consume all of your uplink bandwidth, and then you're not discouraged to deploy hives because you know that the deployment of the hives won't blow up your uplinks. Is that basically what you're getting at?
Kind of. So when people talk about deployable spam, one of the things they are mostly concerned about is the uplinks, because that's what everybody tends to gravitate to, is that there are issues with having a gazillion uplinks on the field, just war point farming with uplinks, right? Because you're always going to spawn there on that target. Whereas with nanohives, it's really situational. Like a nanohive, you can take a very expensive, like really spiffy, fucking triage nanohive, but it is utterly irrelevant in 5 seconds because the battle has moved beyond the location of where that nanohive is. Whereas uplinks are always relevant because that is where you can start from. That's a spawn point that you can then change the tactical situation of the game. But the hives are definitely. I don't think anybody beefs too much about spamming nano hives, frankly, because like I said, one flux grenade usually takes care of all that shit. So if the uplink was part of the root part of the problem, and it was not just spam, but it was like, hey, there just needs to be less uplinks on the field. Fine, leave the system status quo, but adjust the number of deployable uplinks in terms of an incremental change, not unlike what we did with grenades, frankly. So take incremental changes to address the problems. I also think you can readjust the locations of some of the supply depots that would help a lot too. That way, what you don't have, okay, there's two things you can do with supply depots. Number one, you actually locate some of them in areas that are probably more useful to the actual match versus like a 2 or 3 minute trip one way out to the red line to go restock on some stuff and then get back to the fight. And then part two, if there was a way to put some sort of AOE around a supply depot, like a 10-meter bubble around the supply depot that you couldn't have active equipment in, like, hey, it's eating up whatever it does, it just blanks out all nano hives and uplinks within a 10-meter bubble. You would clean up a ridiculous amount of garbage placement of equipment. Imagine the Galente research facility down there in the supply depot room. If the length for that entire room, you couldn't put anything else down. You had to rely on that supply depot. Because that's where a lot of people do Logi bombs at, is they do it right there next to the supply depot. And that's also a way to get garbage war points. If you did those two things with supply depots, and then you lowered the amount of uplinks, let's do that first before you do something as radical as shifting bandwidth. And I'm a big fan of make change, but make change incrementally so that you don't have this dramatic swing left and right in terms of where things are at on the rheostat. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I'm getting what you're saying now.
Well, this is probably why we're not touching anything else really when this comes out.
So is that you saying that we're not going to touch Logi suits when this comes out?
I mean,
Most
I think
likely not, from the looks of it.
So you're going to take the suboptimal suits and then in place a change that will further lower their capability over time in a match. That's crazy, man. Why not make the Logi suit changes first and then implement the bandwidth if that's what we're going to do?
Because a lot of those changes will probably be rendered useless afterwards from the bandwidth. Rather get the bandwidth out first, then be able to play around with it. I mean, it could be something that we could bonus. It could be something that could be like our Logi gets bandwidth bonus for uplinks. Who knows? Because the way this system is fundamentally changing a lot of things with deployables and how they play in the game. So we have to be considerate of how they work out in the game, how we can make bandwidth or the Logi bonuses useful for in that consideration.
Well, you gotta be careful with that though, because you don't want to limit them with bandwidth and then, just reverse the problem and have more uplink spanning. But I think what Jay's getting at is
not only that, you don't want to preemptively do things that on such a large scale. For example, I don't want to be changing AV if there's going to be a massive change to vehicles coming in that patch. I mean, we've done this too many times before, and look how awful it has turned out every time it was done.
It's true, but I think what Jay's getting at is that the suits themselves, in terms of even the values in their fitting reduction on the bonuses is not right. The suits, the slot layouts are all screwed up. They're extremely squishy, very, very squishy suits. And I mean, that has nothing to do with bandwidth. So you've got an easily killable, okay suit that can equip, equipment, but not all that well. And now you're slapping on the bandwidth on top. It's a little frustrating because it feels like, I'm getting semi-nerfed and in the process getting nothing that we really need, which is the ability to not die, the ability to equip, better equipment, that sort of thing.
There was changes before, and I'm pretty sure I remember clearly that there was quite a bit of protest at it. But then again, the goals were different back then. It was just to try to generally buff the Logi suits overall. The goals of making them survivable and being able to be frontline deployers and supporters was not that fully considered at the time. It was just to get them in line. But there was lots of arguments, and basically we're trying to dial back all the changes he was going to plan. And
the short answer is, at a minimum, you can always take the things that apparently you could change that would cause the least amount of drama. For example, the biggest argument that you saw people with the Logi suits was frankly it was over the Amar Logi getting either keeping its sidearm or what, and then that was one of the biggest pieces. Let them keep the sidearm and be done with it. That's a known. That's a trade-off they can make. Fine, Roger that. The Kaldar is in a weird space because it's got 3 equipment slots, but it doesn't have a sidearm. I would tell you that it needs to have CPU buffed and then drop a low slot. There's there's things you can do. I'm a huge fan of the suits by weight class having the same high and lows, and then your equipment and your weapons are what the CPU PG are actually evened out on. That's a huge. I think it would make things a lot easier from a balance perspective too, frankly. So that's, like I said, that's just my opinion on it. And I think that there's things that we could do. And I would also point out that if people are saying that the Logis were beefing about shit, like if you've ever looked in one of the scout threads lately, that's bitching. Okay, like there's no more active component to somebody who's talking about nerfs and buffs than them. So saying that there's too much negative reaction to the Logi suit changes, that's a kind of a cop out. I don't think that's an accurate statement. Nor, frankly, have I seen Rattati shy away from much. Now, maybe he did in this instance, but that's certainly not his MO for most things that he's done so far.
Well, and here's the deal with the discussion, the Logi thing, is that everyone who has been around for a decent amount of time still has the memory of the horror that were Logi suits for a while, the Slayer Logi. And I hear the term Slayer Logi all the time, and I'm quite honestly sick of hearing it. Because, I mean, if you look at, the Logi suit compared to what the Assault suits are capable of right now, the Logi suits would need a massive, extreme buff to make them be better Slayers. They are terrible suits in comparison in so many ways. So I think the Slayer Logi fear, while people still have it, is completely irrational and should really be ignored. I mean, the fact of the matter is that you have assault bonuses right now, which only really 2 of the 3 are considered useful. One is sort of useful, and people will argue that the Caldari reload is useful, but it doesn't make it a better Slayer, really. I mean, you've got the Minotaur with the magazine capacity, you've got the Amar with the heat buildup. Those are good bonuses, but the fact of the matter is that the assault suit bonuses does not say this is a Slayer suit. I mean, they can fit weapons easier, that's cool. They get weapon support bonuses, that's cool, but nothing says this is a Slayer suit. And I think when you look at Logis, you have to also look at that. So you can tell people, listen, we're making the Logis more survivable because of X, Y, and Z. We're doing these things, but we're also reworking the assaults in a bit to show the assaults will remain to be the Slayer suit in comparison to the Logi because we're giving them this. I mean, if it's damage, whatever, something that's distinctive and says this suit is made to kill. And if they've got that, that's an incomparable. That's something the Logi can't replicate on its own because it's a bonus. It's a unique bonus for the Assault, which is something it's never really had. But if you give the Assault something like that, people are going to be more receptive to changes to the Logi to buff them because, again, that fear of the Slayer Logi is rampant among the community. But the fact of the matter is that it's holding back proper discussion about logistics, in making them where they need to be. I mean, Cross the 2 has done a lot of great work in trying to work and make the Logi suits better and fix the bonuses and whatnot, but the fact of the matter is that things need to happen to make these suits better, and people are not going to be receptive to that unless you can look at the other medium frame, which is the Assault, and go, this is what we're going to be doing to make the Assault the Slayer suit that you cannot replicate on a Logi suit. And at the same time, you look at the Logi suit and you go, this is the Logi suit, it is the support suit, this is what we are doing, which cannot be replicated on any other suit to make it a support suit. And I think trying to look at one or the other separately isn't going to happen. You got to look at both as a frame and go, how are these differentiated between each other, and how do you define their roles specifically so people don't freak out and go, oh my god, you're giving the Logi more HP? That's bullshit. They're going to be Slayer Logis. Oh my god, no, nerf the Logi, that's terrible. That's going to happen unless you can actually go, no, the Assault suit will remain the Slayer suit because of this. And I think that if you're trying to band-aid one or the other separately, you're going to run into that issue. So if Rattati is shying away from that, he needs to really understand that it's an issue that affects more than one suit at once, and the whole thing has to be tackled at once. Do you know what I'm saying?
That's very understandable too, and it's been on our balance play for so long. It's not even funny. It's probably the second longest thing that's been on our balance to-do list since we started all these hot fixes.
Yeah, no, and like I said, the bandwidth stuff, it may very well end up being positive, but it's just it's when it's discussed in isolation that it's really tough. That being said, I think that there's a lot of things that they can do across the board, and I again, you got a lot of guys that run Logi suits of whatever race that are very anxiously waiting on what's going to happen with their suit because they've watched what's happened, the very positive changes that have occurred with everybody else's. So, and generally, I think we're on the right track, but it's kind of a fine line when you're. I mean, the reality is we're a minority part of the player base in terms of people that really like to run those, like a niche part of the player base. I got that, and that's somewhat understandable. But there's reticence to really change some of the Logi suits because one could argue, well, they already do something that nobody else can do, which is carry more than two pieces of equipment. But it's just a lot deeper problem than that. So with that, I think we can probably move on from bandwidth discussion. I think the long story short is a lot of people like the idea because it lowers equipment spam, and a lot of people like the idea because it may have perhaps less uplinks on the field. My only counterpoint to that is I think there are less invasive ways to incrementally address it. And then when taken in isolation with no clear or definitive word outside of what Iron Wolf basically just confirmed that they're not looking at dropping a buff or dropping a rework to the Logi suits before the bandwidth goes in, that is a net degradation to the support role. It may only be in the short term, but that is simply a net degradation in the support role. Now, I'll kind of walk away from that one, and I do want to talk about something that is near and dear to my heart because it'll make me feel good, and it makes me think of like puppies and kittens, shit like that, is pirate drop suits. Since we've thrown the tinfoil hat on, I throw my pirate drop suit gauntlet on the ground, and I stare at Pokey Draven and say, "Tell me about pirate drop suits."
I knew it was coming. I just knew it. I was like, he's having a really angsty episode. He's going to go to something he likes, like pirate suits. So yeah, I mean, like we've mentioned it before in the past that for those of you not familiar with Eve, pirate suits are basically drop suits that, or rather, in Eve, they're ships, they're spaceships, not drop suits that gain two bonuses, one from one race of the same class. Like let's say you've got like a pirate battleship, so it may get a bonus from your skill level in Galente battleship, and it gets an additional bonus from your skill level in Caldari battleship. And basically, they're kind of weird specialty ships. They kind of do things a little bit differently than you might expect, but they're usually pretty strong. And so Jason has commanded me to start working on designing pirate drop suits. So I've kind of been working with Cross on that. I mean, it's by no means an official project. It's just something kind of fun we've been working on for future consideration. But I mean, I don't know, Jay, do you want to talk a little bit about what you kind of want to see in those?
Well, one of the things it's actually one of those things that we've talked about for a long time. Back when we still had, kind of like Dust and Rouge was like the quote unquote a new hope. You see how I did that through the Star Wars reference in there.
Crossbar lightsabers, man. That's all I got for
you. The Claymore version of lightsabers. So we this was back a long time ago. There had been discussion about basically what you guys are talking about now in terms of post level 5 content. Like, what do you do when you hit level 5 and whatever? Because the reality is, once you get to about 14 million skill points, you've pretty much dialed in one role, like short of Logi role, just because of the amount of SP that goes into it. But like you've pretty much done all you can do in a given assault role, so to speak. So how do you add content and interest to things beyond the level 5 or that last tier? So pirate ships in Eve are a huge thing. They're very, very popular, and they do a lot of different things. They provide some interesting combinations, both from a lore standpoint and from a mechanic standpoint inside the game. And in my mind, it basically, I don't think it would be too big of a stretch to throw that into something like Dust. So effectively what happens is that you would take two different races and then you would combine factors from them, and it requires combined skill points. Generally, the way it works is that you need to have, like in Eve, at least level 3 in both racial suits in order to access a given pirate ship. if that I know I'm mixing suits and ships here. So, for example, a Garista, the Garista pirate faction is effectively a cross between Caldari and Galente. So you would need level 3 Galente frigates, level 3 Caldari frigates, and then you could access a Garista's pirate frigate, if that makes sense. And then all the bonuses, generally in Eve, they scale by tier or they scale by level. Not all of the bonuses in Dust do, but that's a totally separate discussion. Is actually going through the entire skill tree and then figuring out what matters and what doesn't. But you would effectively, let's say, train your Gal Logi and your Cal Logi to level 3, and then you could access a Garista's Logi, something along those lines, which would then get a unique combination of bonuses or some unique benefits that are perhaps not identified with either the Galente or the Caldari in and of itself. Does that kind of lay it out for you?
Yeah, I mean it's really interesting stuff because I mean, like you said, it's cool to give people that have been around for a long time and have more SP than they know what to do with. I mean, there's a point when you kind of cap out on usable SP, and it's good to open up additional content that you can actually train with more SP. So I think that's definitely a buff to the veteran player experience and giving them more content they can play with that adds a little more variety to the gameplay. No, I mean the question I ask, and just kind of get your guys' thoughts on it. If there was a pirate drop suit system, I mean, is this something that, like the suits would you buy them in the store? Would they be LP only? Would they be random drops? I mean, how do you guys envision that?
I say it's going to be a random drops.
I don't know. That's way too thin. I think you'd actually need to be able to purchase them. They just need to cost more, Yisk.
Okay, yeah, just I mean, I don't really have an opinion on it. I was just kind of curious and the availability, because I mean that is kind of a factor in terms of how strong they can be. You know,
you could have them drop, but give a pretty decent drop rate to them so that people who don't intend to skill into them can just use them as payout buff.
Or a combination of both. You know,
I don't know. I like officer stuff I can kind of buy, but pirate stuff not. I don't know. I think you need to have much better access.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I was suggesting a much higher drop rate than officer gear. Much higher. Like, much higher than officer gear dropped for a supposed event with buffed drop rate.
Oh, the event that I didn't get a single officer weapon in? Yeah, that one.
That one. Yeah, that one. Better than that rate. A lot better. Like, that you might see one or two a match or something like that.
Soldier General just needs a buff.
Yeah, I think officer weapons should probably be like at least as good as the rate we had during this week event, just like normally. If they're a little less exclusive, I honestly think that would be better for balance.
Yeah, I just like I said, my thoughts generally are I would like the suits to be available for use on demand. I don't mind if they cost more, because that's kind of the point. Is like if you provide beyond level 5 content, but then the access to the content is ultimately not controlled by the player. That's problematic.
That's a fair point. I mean, if someone's going to train another race to 5 to get the full benefit, and then they can't use the suit very often because of the drop rate, or even if the drop rate is high, I mean, it's tough to tell people spend millions of SP to train this extra skill to maybe use your suit. So I can see what you're getting at.
Well, here's the problem with the drop rate. So it's no different than the weapons. Like, for example, I've never put 1 single ounce of SP into sniper rifles, but I've got like 55 or 57 Thales that I can do nothing with. So what if let's say the drop rate was, I don't know, like 10%, like whatever it is, like 10 out of every 100 things you get would be like a pirate drop suit. But depending on how many pirate drop suits styles that you have, really the chance of getting the one that you at least can even use would be even significantly lower than that.
Well, that's why we need a player market, but you know.
Well,
I'm not holding my breath.
yeah, but and that's the other point is like because you don't have a player market, I think that you can't limit the access. I think it needs to be access on demand. Like I said, paying for it, Roger, fine. Like, I mean, fuck, make the drop suits like double the cost of the proto suits for all I care. But that that's my point is that you should have access on the player's terms, or at least the player should be able to control or affect their access directly. And random drops is just it's not a really good way to do that.
Yeah, that's a pretty good point. 'Cause, I mean, especially when the requirements for the suit is it has to be the right frame of suit, the right class of suit, and then it has to be the right combination of races that you've trained. That's a lot of variables that have to line up to actually get the thing you want, opposed to a sniper rifle, which is just trained sniper rifles and you've got it. So I can see where you're coming from. That's actually a really valid point that they should be more accessible on demand and not so much just random drops, because chances are 90% of what you get won't be the stuff you have trained, which is kind of a pain in the ass.
Yeah, and like I said, that's one of the little things that I think you could easily add into the mix. I like a lot of the things that they're doing with opening the different BPOs up and having different options. I thought the Apex drop suits were a great idea. I'm not a huge fan of how how some of them are fit, to be honest with you. But I like them. They're pretty good. I mean, it's better than like the little Raven BPO or whatever that I used to have, or the Dren BPOs. So they're pretty cool. I'm a big fan of them, actually. I do like the idea of adding different styles of content utilizing the drop suits that we already have. And the reality is, anything with a drop suit for the most part is a paint job and numbers in a spreadsheet. So those seem to me like almost like low-hanging fruit that can be addressed and added into the game with with some effort, but probably less effort than a lot of other things that people are asking for.
Well, especially if you take existing drop suit layouts in terms of slots and resources, and you basically keep them pretty much the same. At that point, the pirate design comes down to pretty much bonuses and picking what color you want it to be. So, I mean, in that regard, it's really not a lot of effort to implement, other than, like you said, entering values into a spreadsheet, as long as the design part is done properly. And in that, it's mostly bonuses. And I mean, the idea is that it's not necessarily a straight upgrade; it's more of a side grade to a kind of a tweak on the specialization, which
Well,
is.
I think you need to be careful of that. It's like, I mean, well, it depends if you're looking at it from an Eve perspective or from a purely like taking dust sort of as an aside, because the reality is that a pirate frigate is generally going to be better than a T1 frigate in any stretch of the imagination. A pirate frigate is often going to be, I would say, somewhere close to a side grade, but a little bit of an upgrade over a T2 frigate as well, just because the SP investment in there warrants it based on the bonuses you get. So it's not a pure side grade. There's definitely some vertical movement into it, which then goes to it. That's what actually makes it beyond level 5 content, at least in my mind.
Yeah, and that's fair. I mean, obviously, I'm not a fan of balancing with ISK cost, but I mean, if it's a slight upgrade and it costs a little bit more, I think that's fair enough. I mean, it's not a massive jump, but it does kind of inherently have some advantage. I think that's fine, as long as it's not like once you get your pirate suit, don't ever bother using a standard suit again, because, or, you don't ever bother using your normal T2, we'll call them, suits again. I mean, you don't want to have a situation where you make one obsolete, but I think it's definitely fine if it's a slight upgrade.
Yeah, no, and like I said, it's one of the things that just adds some adds different components to the game, which I think is a net positive by anybody's stretch right now.
Well, and again, it gives people the option to have a slightly different play style, where you can have an assault suit that's moving a bit faster than what you would expect normal assault suit to move, just because of its Mimitar bonus associated with it.
Yeah, and just what I had done is like I collaborated with Pokey on kind of a variety of different design options, taking sort of an homage to the ships in Eve that are laid out. So, for example, you might have an Angel Cartel or a Serpentis assault suit that would move very fast. It would basically be best in class speed, but it would be a little thinner tank, and it'd probably be able to apply a lot of DPS, but you would lower it. You would actually nerf the amount of ammo that it could carry. There's things like that you could do that would provide different capabilities and different options, different tactical options to folks. And that's okay. And for the record, pirate suits aren't all about buffs. And often what you find is that they actually nerf or they degrade certain components on them to sort of even them out so they're not totally OP.
Well, which is the definition of a side grade, is that you're gaining something for the cost of something else. I mean, if those values are equal, I mean, that's like, that kind of comes down to, like you said, it's a slight upgrade. I mean, so that's all in the balance right there. But I mean, overall, it's a specialization in a different sort of direction, but still within the class.
Yeah, no, I can buy that. Let's see, what else we had. Those are really the big topics that I had kind of on the agenda tonight. You guys have anything else you want to tee up?
Frame post.
Which one? Help me out. I couldn't hear you.
The frame post.
The FanFest one.
Well, I don't know really what to say about it. It's like long story short is there's not going to be any formal mention of Dust or Legion at FanFest. Frankly, I didn't really think that they were going to mention any.
No announcement.
I think pretty sure he said no mention. Much like Vegas.
They very specifically said there would be roundtables.
That's not mentioned, dude. That's shit off to the side that nobody sees.
Yeah, if it's not publicized, it's not really anything people are going to care about, because then it's on the players to transfer information back to the community. That's on the players then.
Most of the information that was from last year was in roundtables.
And how well did it go?
That went
so
year? Well. Yeah, that was not good. I mean, if it was televised, sure.
I know. I mean, like, the information that wasn't terrible was in roundtables.
Well, okay, but the fact that it was so messy is not good. I mean, if they televised the roundtables, sure, cool. That'd be kind of cool.
Well, I mean, like, I think, for one, is like a lot of stuff gets taped and posted on YouTube, but isn't streamed. And I would like to hope that at the very least that it makes it to YouTube.
Hope is a method.
No, it needs to be an official thing.
It's kind of a bit early to say hope, or to confirm more than hope. But I mean, like, there is an actual schedule that they have to try and cram all the things they want to stream into. And some roundtables get streamed and some do not. And there will be both Rouge and Rotati there. But there won't be a keynote is really the big difference. And I think it's actually a very good thing. Because I think that we've had two really terrible keynotes.
I would like to, for the record, point out this thing I refer to as Exhibit A, which is the library of this podcast, where you have, in conjunction with Pokey and I, on many occasions, said how much it would be really cool if CCP would talk more.
I agree.
But not you now say
no, I agree. They need to talk more.
Good.
Let them finish so.
They need to talk more, but not at a keynote.
Well, okay, sure.
I guess I'll hop in my usual overly optimistic self and say that just because there's not an announcement at FanFest doesn't mean that there won't be an announcement before or after or in whatever time frame. So, I mean, that's one thing to consider. I mean, they said last year that the intention initially was to announce Legion before FanFest, but because marketing, it got pushed back. And I think this is them trying to go back and go, no, really, we aren't going to screw you guys and announce weird shit at FanFest. We're going to tell you ahead of time. So in that regard, it's a good thing, assuming that something is actually announced, which I am very hopeful for. Prior to, obviously.
I'm totally on board with them announcing that Dust is going to the fucking PS Vita any day now. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. No, Jason, everyone knows Sony doesn't support the Vita, so it's pointless to even think anything will ever be on Vita.
Yeah,
that's fair.
Nobody loves the PS Vita. I'm sorry.
No, I mean, but I think the point is that, I will say it, because I've got two CPM members in here. Well, really only one that's teed up on it is again, to a degree, it is becoming true that the CPM is, as much as we would like them to be the direct representatives of the players and holding our interest to CCP, they are left holding the bag by CCP to represent the company to the players. Because for an errant post that CCP Frame put out, again, there was the way that came out, they could have easily taken 30 minutes and said something dramatically, not dramatically different, but noticeably different. And frankly, something of that import based on how things worked out last year. If CCP Rouge is the one that says, here's what we're not going to do at FanFest, here's why, and here's a teaser of some of the things that we want to talk to you about over the next month or two. If that's about 2 paragraphs, maybe 3, if you really have a really snazzy intro that could have been typed up in maybe 20 to 30 minutes, and it would have said basically what Frame did, but diffused any concern, because right now, nothing coming out of CCP, when they don't communicate, it's sketchy. When they do communicate, it's usually in a very inconsistent fashion. So, I frankly, I didn't think they were going to say shit about Legion at FanFest. To be honest with you, I didn't think they were going to say anything about it. But the fact that they kind of, after the Eve Vegas sort of that debacle of that ridiculous video that made the rounds, it's basically we're not going to give you a seat at the table at our company's flagship event. I don't think anybody's asking necessarily for a huge keynote, but something that would actually be broadcast during the stream, where there's hey, here's the 30-minute presentation on Dust/Legion or whatever. I think that would be a fair thing to ask for.
The question I'm asking is, you say oh well, this game doesn't deserve a seat at the table. How much? That's as if it's CCP as a whole saying that. Whereas I would argue that CCP that we may not want a seat at the table.
I have no idea what you're saying right now.
I'm saying that I don't think we need a big marketing brouhaha to do.
I don't think anybody said anything about a marketing brouhaha.
You're asking about a keynote and a statement from Rouge.
No, I'm not. I did not. I very specifically said not a keynote. So I appreciate you listening yet again. So what I'm getting at is, I think that just something that was on any one of the little 20 or 30 minute broadcast Twitches would be nice, where they would talk a little bit about, here's what our plans are for the game, sort of like some sort of general vision, or at least this is what we've done so far. We look forward to keep continuing to work with you. It could be anything, but fine, whatever. But you can't have it two ways. And I'm talking to you very specifically, Zell. You can't say their communication sucks, and then when they don't communicate, you say, oh, but that doesn't suck. That's actually a good thing that they're not communicating. That's ridiculous.
I'm very specifically saying I'm glad we're not getting a keynote, that we're not holding, because if you have a keynote, you are distinctly setting that. If you look at what's announced in Eve between in the 3 months prior to FanFest, it's non-existent. They don't announce
that
stuff.
Is totally not accurate. They totally not accurate.
They do not announce stuff that they can hold for a keynote, for a big to-do at FanFest.
That is absolutely, yeah, but I don't think you have a good idea of how many things they have been announcing prior to significant public statements right now. The amount of information flow coming out of the Eve side of CCP is as high as I have ever seen in all of the time I've been playing that game, either off or on. I'm dead serious. They are at a dramatically different pace in terms of the consistency and quality of communication coming out of Eve, and the Eve side specifically, and they have been for quite some time now.
I think, Zell, I think one of the pitfalls of being on CPM is that it's easy to forget that we know a hell of a lot less than you do, and when you don't know anything, context is everything. So when Frame comes out and says there's not going to be a keynote at FanFest, it's a big deal because most people don't see the context. They don't know what's going on. All they see is, we're not telling you anything on the big, on the big announcement where we announce everything. We're not going to tell you anything. That's all they see. And even if you know what's going on, what's going to be announced, when it's going to be announced, etc., no one else does. So when they perceive that as CCP doesn't give a shit about us and they don't want to talk to us, that's really understandable. And I fear that it's easy for people in the CPM to forget that we don't know as much as they do, and it's not that we're misinterpreting things, it's that we just simply don't know because the context is so screwed up. And I think it's kind of what Jason's getting at, is that, you know, when we know so little, it's very important to give context to what you're saying, not just spit out a little blurb that sure makes sense to someone who knows what's going on, but it's actually a pretty big deal, and it can be quite upsetting for a lot of people who don't know what's going on, you know?
I'll say this real quick. You know how, like, BlizzCon only happens when Blizzard has something to announce?
Yeah, I don't, but yeah, I'll totally go with it. Sure.
They skip a lot of
Blizzard
years.
has basically said that we'll never hold a BlizzCon unless we got something big to announce.
Okay. No. All right. That's
They
that's
don't
fair.
have
I
one
got
every
you.
year just because.
Yeah. No, I got you.
Well, this is a very similar situation for us and FanFest, is that we don't have anything that big to announce at FanFest this year, and there's really no reason for us to go to make a big show of it. This is most likely going to be Valkyrie's FanFest, if anything. And I know it's upsetting for everyone who isn't in the CPM, who knows what's going on and what information is being disseminated, and we keep harping on it to CCP, and CCP knows the issue, they know what's going on, and that's one of the reasons why there is that post from Frame. It's basically to help people who are, because going to FanFest takes a while of planning. I mean, some people have been booking a year ahead of time, and this is just to help those people who might have been trying to go for FanFest for Dust information or Legion information, that maybe they should probably change their plans if they need to.
But I think you've proven Jay's point in that what you just said, if they had added something along that lines of what you just said to that post, it would have changed the context completely, and the perception would be totally different.
I know, but things with marketing does not go as fast or as easy or as simple as you would hope it would have gone in a normal world.
Yeah, but I think you don't misunderstand me. The fact that they posted it, I think, was a huge positive. Okay. Now, again, based on how the last FanFest went, and I would also like to point out to our CPM 0, former member that's now CPM 1, Iron Rule Saver, that the amount of time that everybody spent talking about how much Rouge was going to be working with the community, how fired up he was to communicate with the community, and all that other good stuff. And you could count the number of actual public communications in the form of text posts that he's made to the community, on two hands, maybe with a finger or two extra, since he's been on board. So I think, given the context of how he came on board, the lead up to FanFest and how FanFest went, it would have been a totally, and I think if he had made the post and said, here's why we're not going to do this, but here's some things that we're going to talk to you about in the future, basically not much more information that is already out there in the feedback threads that Rattati has already posted. Had he done that, a little bit of the why, because that's the big thing that nobody gets on the Dust side, is the why. A lot of it is just, it's totally in the dark. It's totally.
But I mean, you are
ridiculous
saying that the executive producer who does not post often making a post should be no big deal.
Well, number one, he should, for something like this, based on how it went last year and the fact that he was the center of that storm. Yeah, I kind of think so.
I mean, regardless of what's going on in terms of inner politics and reasons why or why they aren't posting, the fact of the matter is that when you make a post like that without the context and people get upset, you need to be very aware of why they're getting upset. Because, I mean, I think that the backlash is like, oh, well, they're just, misinterpreting. And it's like, well, of course they are, because they don't know anything.
Well, there's an expectation that should never have occurred, to be honest.
What was that expectation?
Well, but why is that, though?
The thing is it's the same thing that happened at EVegas, where everyone is, well, they're certainly silent because they're going to announce something at EVegas. So EVegas, and certainly they're going to announce something at FanFest. I heard it a lot. It's like, well, they've got to say something at Vegas. They absolutely have to say something at Vegas. No, they don't, and they're probably not going to. It's an expectation situation, and it is better to remove the erroneous expectation than
that
for
there
me
would
to
be any
ping them.
communication. Absolutely, I think that's a so totally plausible idea. Anecdotally, I would tell you most people didn't think there was going to be any discussion about anything at Vegas reference Legion or Dust. To be honest with you, I wasn't tracking anybody. Like I said, anecdotally, that there's thinking there was going to be some like incredibly high speed announcement or really anything formal at all going on at Vegas.
I mean, the fact of the matter is that when you announce something like that, you need to explain why you're announcing. Like what you're saying makes perfect sense. And I think it's great that he came out and said that because it does kind of stem that expectation. But the fact of the matter is that people perceive it a certain way unless you tell them this is why we're telling you this. I mean, I know it may seem trivial or childish, but the fact of the matter is that PR within CCP is pretty damn awful, especially if you have a dev doing it. So the fact of the matter is that they need to come out and say, this is why we're telling you, because we don't want you to get your hopes up for FanFest, but we're still working on the game. It's not like it's we're giving up on or anything. We just don't have anything that's going to be available at that date. And something as simple as that would have been huge. And so the fact that people are upset is perfectly understandable, and I think it could have been avoided. And I think that's kind of my whole point is that, and Jay's as well, correct me if I'm wrong, that it would not have taken much more effort to add a little extra blurb on there to say, this is why we're saying this, so don't be upset. Yeah, I think that's key.
No, I think you're spot on, Pokey. And like I said, I think it's a positive that they made an announcement, but again, like in so many cases, which again we've heard you guys also say, is it's how they do it. The execution leaves something lacking is really the deal. And I would like to point out that saying that, hey, we don't want them to make an announcement because it'll be bad or they suck at it. No, that's not a useful paradigm either. Like it's not about needing some huge marketing brouhaha. It's literally just, hey, you need to describe what the communication plan is to, or at least what the communication pathway is to the player base. Is what we've always been saying. That's literally all it is. So like the net effect is, like, I don't think that they're shocking anybody that they're not saying anything, because I think by this time a lot of people frankly had become bitter and they were assuming there would be nothing mentioned in what they think is happening, because nothing's going to be mentioned at FanFest, which is the company's flagship social event for all things CCP, is that Legion's dead. But I think you guys would very quickly tell me that no, it's not. So I think if it was handled in a little bit different way, it was almost like inoculating. You could have inoculated the player base to certain negative tinfoil and negative influence or information activities inside the community. You could have quickly inoculated people to that, and frankly, probably could have turned it into a true positive. So, just a thought.
Well, I'm not arguing against that. That you could have said it as a missed opportunity to try to turn things around. But like I said, marketing's not as fast in messaging as you would think they would be. And then there are just some times when things are considered a higher priority than other things. I mean, I wish I can say all the things I actually know, but the thing is, if he wants to do it, I'm going to let him do it.
Yeah, no, and I would tell you that I have a lot of empathy to a degree for the CPM, in that, I've said it many times, and me personally, I think it's actually coming to fruition, is that you guys are the de facto face of CCP, that's not what you got voted in to be, and that will put you in direct odds with the player community, because the communication is so poor and so anemic coming out generally about what's happening beyond 1 month from now when the next hot fix comes in. Like, the CPM is literally, they are the only face that's or voice that has any sort of legitimacy that's speaking about it. So that strikes me as again a very unhealthy thing, and I think most of it, like we talked about this when I think we had the majority of the CPM on in one of the earlier shows, maybe like 20 shows ago, and we mentioned this, and I think to a man, all of you agreed that that would be not a position you'd want to be in, but kind of that's where you're at right now.
There's a lot of things we're not supposed to be doing, and we're still doing them.
Yeah, no, I understand. Like I said, I have a certain amount of empathy for that. It's just one of those where I think it creates unnecessary stress and conflict within the player base. So, and generally through no fault of yours. So, okay. Well, on that, we've been going at it for quite a while, guys. What I would like to do is kind of wrap this up if that's okay. Unless there's anybody had any parting shots going around the horn.
I was just going to note, do keep an eye out. I think Frame said there should be a dev blog next week, so.
Okay.
You want to say that? Cool.
All right. Well, that's good. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Pokey.
No, I was just saying. I know he had hinted at it. I wasn't aware that he had flat out said something. So that's pretty cool.
There was a blue post that said dev blog next week,
and where was that at?
It was just in some thread. I don't. It was just there, and
They love hiding important information in threads that I may or may not read.
There's this wonderful tab called Dev Post right at the top.
I guess that's fair, but
go look at them.
I would say that generally it's another symptom of a probably less than optimal communication plan. But if you posted it, great. Like I said, I totally didn't. You'd mentioned that before, Zell, and I was like, where the hell are you talking about? Because I totally didn't. I didn't see that announcement anywhere, so I actually looked under the announcements page. And I just tried to find it.
No, it's not. They don't announce a dev blog is coming, but someone might mention it.
Well, yeah, I mean, but that's the thing. I think there just needs to be a little bit more organized. If they're going to only talk infrequently, I would rather it be somewhat more decipherable than fucking Yoda. So that's just sort of my beef about it. But anyway, that's a good catch that there is a dev blog. You said Monday? Is that what you said, Monday?
No, just sometime.
Or just next week? Okay. All right, that's cool. All right. Well, I think I've got no saved rounds on this one, so I'd recommend go ahead and move into shout-outs. What do you think, guys?
Sounds good.
I like to say I'm glad this week's finally over. I got so many things done for the CPM, and it's like, now I can get back to my personal projects again.
Awesome. So, sounds like Iron Wolf is giving a shout-out to time management. Hello. All right, so any shout-outs to Iron Wolf, seriously?
I like to give a shout out to the community for keeping me motivated and getting these things done, as hard as it sometimes they get, or how much workload there is. And I like to give a shout out to CPM for all the shit they give me. Just kidding. And shout out to the development team and all the unsung heroes that have been working with Toddy. I wish I could speak in English and would want recognition, but Chinese culture makes it slightly hard for that to do.
We saw one made a post.
One made a post. I like to see the other three post.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Zell, shout-outs?
Shout-outs. I really should think of these ahead of time.
Yeah, I mean, we only do them like every week.
Every week. Every week. We do these every week? I'm going to give a shout out to Star Citizen for proving that you can, in fact, sell virtual starships. That's virtual starships that don't exist yet for $2,500 a pop. And there are people who will buy them.
Yep, codename Fleetfoot.
It's like a fly trap for suckers.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Pokey, any shout-outs?
Oh, sorry. My comms keep cutting out, so I miss half what people are saying. But yeah, shout out to everyone here today for beating the hell out of each other. It was very enjoyable, despite hopefully no hard feelings. And then a shout out to Cross2, actually. He's been keeping me pretty busy lately with design stuff and just bouncing ideas off me and stuff. So it's been fun, and it's a good distraction from work when I don't want to pay attention. So shout out to Cross. Other than that, shout out to my corp, OSG Planetary Operations, as usual. You guys are awesome. Love playing with you.
Awesome. And let's see, shout outs for me. Shout out to the guys in OSG, to my desk corp, and big shout outs to the guys in Agony Unleashed, the guys I fly with on the U side. It's an incredibly great group of guys. Really, really solid group of fellas, and probably no finer small game PvP than you got in the game right now. It's really a joy to fly with them, and you really have to work your butt off just to keep up, and I think that's a great thing. So shout out to both of those groups. I would like to give a shout out, I know this will be a shocker, to the actual CPM, at least those that are working and putting out the effort. I'll reserve judgment on all of them, but I think it's pretty obvious when you have some people that are actually putting a lot of time and effort in for the community. They catch a lot of slings and arrows, and their work is appreciated. Often not understood, or at least misunderstood, and many times cross purposes to at least 49% of the population's desires, but their intent and their heart is in the right place. So I do appreciate the work and the effort that they're putting out in what is essentially being unpaid interns / PR people for CCP. And with that, guys, I think we're going to bring this episode to a close. We really appreciate everybody joining us, like the three of you out there listening to us on our somewhat unscheduled live stream tonight. But we
We
do
love you,
appreciate,
three people.
yeah, we do appreciate all the actual downloads. You guys are great, and we do appreciate the feedback, because I know we've been getting quite a bit over the last week or two. So please keep that coming in, and if you're ever interested in being on the show, please contact Soraya Zell, Pookie Draven, or myself, Jason Larison. Or if you have any critical topics you want to put up, please do that too. And you're more than willing to come on here, vent your piece, and feel free to get smacked down for it, but that's okay. Just like the forums, we just try to be maybe a little nicer to each other, because you can actually get context over with voice comms, not so much text. So we appreciate it, and guys, thank you very much, and we'll see you next week.